Welcome to the Sleep Makeover Podcast and our first podcast in this brand new year. My name is Elaine Goldman, also known as your Fairy Godmother of Sleep, and I'm the creator of the complete guide to getting 8 hours of uninterrupted beauty sleep a night without having to take a single drug or supplement. This is podcast number 8 in our series, Self-Care Begins with Sleep. And although this is the last podcast where we're going to specifically get into the strategies for elevating deep sleep in your daily life and in your conversations about self-care, I have some really lovely interviews on deck for you so that we can tie this all together and explore this topic a little bit further before we take our next steps. And a little bit later, I'm going to be sharing with you a bit about my own journey and how relevant this particular podcast was for me personally. All right, so let's get started. And just as a reminder, remember that sleep is that magical time when your body repairs itself, consolidates memories, and protects you from disease. So it is vital for any discussion about your long-term health and happiness. So let me recap briefly where we are in this series as we work our way down the letters in self-care. S stands for sleep deeply by giving yourself permission to put you and your bedtime first. E stands for embrace your wild animal essence, because when you reclaim your wild animal essence or spirit, you connect more fully to the world around you and you become more of who you were really meant to be. L is about listening to the wisdom of your inner voice speak, and I might add, to cultivate internal silence so you can better put other people's advice in its proper perspective and listen better or hear more clearly when your own inner voice speaks to you. And I'll be getting into this even further with my beloved inner circle on Patreon. And if you haven't checked me out on Patreon, I'll give you all the information at the end of this podcast. F was all about following the cycles of nature because, bottom line, there is no self-care without aligning your body with the natural cycles of our planet, which includes first and foremost deep quality sleep. C was to create a sleep temple fit for a god or goddess. A was to awaken your sensuality using your 5 senses. R was to rediscover something you loved to do as a child so you can relax and feel happy before bed. And this podcast number 8 is E, and E is all about engaging in the lost art of not doing so you can make more room for joy. How many times have you been told that the key to success is to work hard and hustle harder? Wake up earlier, go to bed later, set goals, do more things, check more boxes off your list. Do, do. You're told that rest is for the weak and the lazy, and only for those people who don't want it enough. Who don't want success enough to sacrifice their well-being. To me, this is the height, the epitome of topsy-turvy, 180-degree from where it should be craziness. And in this equation, in this discussion that they are having about what we're supposed to be doing and not doing, happiness and joy are never even mentioned. Alex Soo-Jung King Pang, I'm not sure if I'm saying his name correctly, but he wrote an article that I just love called "Darwin Was a Slacker and You Should Be Too." In this article, he really chips away or demolishes this myth that the more you do, the more productive you are. He writes, many famous scientists and writers didn't work long hours at all. For instance, Charles Darwin of natural selection fame, he wrote 19 books and worked 4 hours a day. Charles Dickens, the novelist, 34 novels, worked 5 hours a day. Ernest Hemingway, 15 novels, worked 6 hours a day. And lest you think there's no one modern working the same way, Stephen King, who wrote 50 books, is known to work 4 to 6 hours a day. What did they do the rest of the time? The rest of the time they spent outdoors, napping, thinking, pondering, spending time with family, and involved in different hobbies. And some were even involved in politics. After I read his article, Pang's article here, I discovered that he had a book, which I highly recommend, entitled "Rest: Why You Get More Done When You Work Less." In the book, he cites this research. In the 1950s, researchers studied productivity among scientists and found, when they plotted the graph, that productivity took the shape of a bell curve with, and here was the startling piece of information, with 10 to 20 hours at the peak, at the top of the bell curve, meaning 10 to 20 hours of work a week was the most productive. It turns out that scientists who spent 25 hours a week working were no more productive than those who spent 5. What? And scientists working 35 hours a week were half as productive as those working 20 hours a week. The group that worked 60 hours a week, typical for many working people today, were the least productive of all. Let me say that again. The people who worked 60 hours a week were the least productive of all. So Pang goes on to talk about how we measure productivity. And I thought this was also really interesting. He cites or talks about Malcolm Gladwell. Malcolm Gladwell is the well-known author who famously concluded in his book Outliers that it takes 10,000 hours of practice or work in a particular field to become an expert, or what he calls an exceptional performer. You most likely have heard this by now yourself, this 10,000 hours benchmark figure. Well, here's the thing that's relevant for us in this podcast. What Gladwell missed in his analysis is the fact that the students that he relied on for his conclusion also slept 1 hour more on average than their less accomplished peers. So the exceptional performers also slept an hour more, and that they took naps and long breaks as well. In other words, the world-class performers that he mentions that are cited in this 10,000 hours doesn't just come after 10,000 hours of practice. It comes after 10,000 hours of what Pang calls deliberate or hyper-focused practice, 12,500 hours of deliberate rest, and 30,000 hours of sleep. Scientists, scholars, and almost all of us have this kind of blind spot because we've grown up with this perspective, and we share this tendency to only focus on the actual focused work piece of the equation and dismiss all the rest. For instance, researchers studying high-performing athletes only focused on what was done in the gym or the track or the practice room and ignored everything else. So I want to share with you a moment where I am in my own journey that relates to this particular podcast. In full transparency, after my father died, I got really sick for a few days. And in my effort to console and soothe myself from grief and feeling so sick, I had a very uplifting experience, or you could say I found a new place of alignment or a new higher vibrational place. Now, I know this sounds like a complete contradiction. How could the death of someone's beloved father lead to something so uplifting? But I want to share this with you because I knew in my heart and in my gut that I'd found this place, this new energetic place, but that if I just went back to doing work, that I would have a harder time coming back and hitting that spot or finding that spot again. So I took time out for some really focused internal work. And on the surface of things, it looked like I wasn't doing anything at all. I didn't get out a new podcast. I didn't get out my members only Patreon very special video. I didn't take action on the long list of items on my to-do list. And I did struggle a bit because of this status quo perspective that if you're not producing, you're not being productive and your time is not worthwhile. So it did bother me a little. I can't say that it didn't. And I did feel a bit defensive about it, but I knew that I had to, and I knew to follow my own inner guidance on this. So I took the time that I needed for inner work and tried not to judge myself for lack of this outer product. And I got a real boost. I really did find that a place that I could come back to over and over and over again. Oh, and you could say that I broke new ground, and I wouldn't have had this leap forward or consolidated this leap forward had I not taken the time for this focused inner work. Has there been a time in your life when you've had this experience too? Quite possibly. All right. So moving on. So I wanted to share this with you to empower you to know And when your own inner guidance speak, even when society says that you're a slacker for not producing and not doing, it's always right to listen to what your inner guidance is sharing with you. I wouldn't have gotten this leap or this boost or solidified this new vibrational place had I not done that. And again, I want to give you permission to do the same for yourself. All right, moving on. I don't know if you've heard of Mastin Kipp, but he writes something he calls a daily love blog. And I really like this post from a year or so ago. Here's the quote. In today's hustle and bustle, we rarely take time to actually rest. There is a belief that permeates our culture which says, if I'm not always busy, I'm not accomplishing anything and I don't feel valuable. He continues, your worth is not related to being too busy, too stressed, and having a maximized schedule. Your worth, your value comes from within and is something that is there no matter how much you produce or get done in a day. Well said. This post reminds me of a woman I once knew who was busy all the time. I don't just mean like a normal busy life. I mean every second of every day was occupied and planned with something. I never saw her sit still. She ran from one event to another, from one meeting to another. When you were sitting talking to her, she was multitasking and doing 3 other things. No part of her day was unplanned or unfilled. Yet it seemed to me, rather than being something admirable, it seemed to me that she used her hyper busyness as a strategy to keep from feeling her feelings or to keep her feelings, her emotions suppressed. When you habitually suppress your feelings, it's frankly hard to feel anything. It's like your emotions become flatlined. And that means not only are you not feeling the feelings that you're afraid of feeling because they might be painful or hurtful, but you're also suppressing feelings of happiness and joy. Because when you stifle one feeling, you stifle the other. So just notice in yourself, if you're hyper busy, if you're using this popular belief of being busy all the time as a way to protect yourself from feeling or protect yourself from what could be perceived as painful emotions. When I allowed myself to finally feel some of these things that I'd been running from, what I noticed was it hurt for a bit, but it was way less painful than all the effort and attention I used to keep those feelings down. So this brings me to the heart of today's podcast. Self-care begins with sleep E, and E is to engage in not doings so you can make more room for joy and happiness in your life. I first heard this idea of not doings from the author Carlos Castaneda in the mid-1990s. Carlos wrote, I'd say a dozen books, and he was the subject of a lot of attention and mystery. And in the 1990s, he held a number of public seminars. Carlos believed that not doings or not doing something in your usual habitual way created a mini disruption, little cognitive dissonance in your normal, often repetitive internal dialogue, and that would create space for something new to be born. It would create space for you to have a moment where you could choose to go about doing things in the old habitual way or to create something new. Carlos used to do things like putting his left shoe on his right foot, or use his less dominant hand to write or tie his shoes. I can attest to the fact that this form of not doing is really effective at minimizing your internal mind chatter and creating moments of internal silence, peace, and joy. So for organic sleep self-care step number 8, I want you to experiment with this. I want you to intentionally do something different than the normal habitual way that you normally do it, and allow that mini disruption so you can have more fluidity or more plasticity to choose something new. All right, here are some suggestions, but I know you're going to come up with a few on your own that are tailor-made specifically for you. You could put your ring or bracelet that you normally wear on one hand on the other hand. You could walk backwards. You could sit and do absolutely nothing for, say, 5 minutes. No phone, no TV, no knitting, no nothing. And that one is most likely easier if you've practiced meditation before. You could try sitting in perfect posture for 5 minutes. You could listen intently to someone talk without offering any bit or any single bit of advice or interrupting them in any way to tell something about you or your story. You could spend a day talking only about what's working and things that you like without saying but or I don't. You could part your hair on the other side. You could eat or write with your less dominant hand. And back in the day when I was really practicing this for the first time, I cut off all my long, dark brown, big curly hair to less than an inch and dyed it blonde. Now, I'm not suggesting that you do something as extreme, but it did create this disruption because as a woman, I realized how much energy I had tied up in my hair, flipping it, setting it just right. And without it to rely on, it was a very different experience. And maybe, just maybe, you're not doing is to allow yourself to rest without any negative self-judgment. The Dalai Lama said, "We are human beings, not human doings." And Richard Branson, in his blog, How to Hack into Happiness, wrote, "We need to take the focus off doing and start being." Not only are work and rest not in opposition to each other, but they are intimately entwined, enhancing each other, so you can have a fuller, happier, and more joyful life experience, and lest I say, even more productive one. When you get to the end of your life, will you be celebrating how many items on your to-do list that you completed? No, of course not. What you will cherish the most is the amount of happiness and joy you shared with others and experienced yourself. And that's what this podcast is all about. So for organic sleep self-care step number 8, try practicing not doings throughout your day and allow yourself to have this little mini disruption so you could choose better feeling thoughts and let the happiness that you create ripple out into the world so you can spread more love and joy. This brings us to the end of podcast number 9 and number 8 in this series. And to find notes for the show, go to patreon.com/organic sleep. That's patreon.com/organic sleep, where we are just getting started, gathering momentum in building a community of amazing men and women who are open to and reaching for more health, more mental clarity, more presence, more confidence, more alignment, more feeling alive, more peace, more well-being, more purpose, and more joy. And please share this podcast with someone in your life who you know will benefit from greater health and happiness. I really look forward to us spending more time together in this coming year. So let me hear you say it. Right. Self-care begins with sleep. Until next time, my friend, wishing you nights of deep restorative sleep and the sweetest of dreams. Bye for now.